In March of 12 BC, while preparing his legions for military action in the upper Danuvius region of the Alps, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, the son-in-law of Caesar Augustus, died at the age of 51. At the time of his death, Marcus Agrippa had risen to become the second man in the empire, behind only Caesar Augustus as heir to Rome's mighty legions. When Augustus received the news that Agrippa had fallen ill and was confined to his villa in Campania, he immediately abandoned the business of overseeing the annual festival to the gods Mars and Minerva and rushed to his friend's side. Sadly, by the time Augustus arrived in Campania, Agrippa had passed. Upon his return from Rome's eastern provinces, Agrippa's health had begun to decline. Rumors abounded that he was plagued by gout, along with other health-related issues, which seemed to be made worse during wintertime. And, according to the historians, the winter of the 13 BC to 12 BC year was particularly rigorous. Taking official charge of Agrippa's body, Caesar Augustus personally escorted it back to Rome, where he then handled all the funeral arrangements for his dearest friend. Marcus Agrippa had blessed the city of Rome with new and improved aqueducts, sewage systems, and bathhouses. He had repaired Rome's crumbling streets and deteriorating buildings. It was also thanks to Agrippa that Julius Caesar's Septa Iulia in the Forum Romanum, where Rome's tribal assembly could meet to vote, was brought to completion. He had also constructed a large temple on the Campus Martius, called the Pantheon, which he dedicated to all of Rome's gods and goddesses. But even beyond those contributions, Agrippa had built multiple harbors, greatly upgraded Rome's naval capabilities, created new state-of-the-art weaponry, and had been the architect of those military victories which had secured an end to Rome's bloody civil wars. For a lifetime of service to the state, Caesar Augustus and the Roman Senate decreed that Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa be given a public funeral, thus allowing the whole of Rome to mourn and pay their respects to the man who had given them so much. The main eulogy honoring Agrippa was given by Caesar Augustus himself, who was so grief-stricken over the loss of his lifelong friend and political partner that he refused to shave for a month, growing out his beard in bereavement. And even though Agrippa had already constructed his own tomb, wherein the cremated remains of the Vipsaniae family might rest, it pleased Caesar Augustus to place Agrippa's remains beside those of Marcus Claudius Marcellus within his own monumental tomb of the Juliae. Ordering artisans to insert carved images of Marcus Agrippa into the tomb's decorative artwork, Agrippa, whose suddenly ancient and noble lineage had been manufactured in the pages of Virgil's Aeneid, alongside the lineage of Augustus, now became an integral part of Rome's new Julian mythology. And Caesar Augustus and the Romans were not the only ones to honor the memory of Marcus Agrippa. King Herod of Judea, who had developed a close personal friendship with the second man in Rome during his tenure as governor of the eastern provinces, passed on the now illustrious name to his next grandson, born the following year, naming the newborn baby boy Herod Agrippa. Surviving Agrippa was his widow, the only daughter of Augustus, Julia Augusti Filia, who had given him 4 children already and was pregnant with Agrippa's 5th child at the time of his death. Agrippa also left behind 4 daughters from his previous marriages, Vipsanias Agrippina and Attica by his first wife, and Vipsanias Marcella and Marcellina by his second wife. His eldest daughters had given him 3 young grandchildren, a now 2-year-old son born to Vipsania and Tiberius, and the infant children of the husbands of Agrippa's 2nd and 3rd daughters. For Caesar Augustus, it was clear that Agrippa's 9 children and 3 grandchildren would need close monitoring in light of the shifting political landscape which was sure to follow his death. As a means of gaining influence with Caesar Augustus, as well as the legions, ambitious families would not hesitate to try and attach themselves to the many daughters of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, or to his widow Julia, the greatest prize of all. Caesar Augustus had himself used his daughter Julia, arranging for her to marry his nephew, Marcellus, as a means of acquiring a would-be heir. But Marcellus, who was not well received by Rome's legions, died, and Caesar Augustus once again used his daughter to secure the heir demanded by the legions, Marcus Agrippa. Yet, as fate would have it, Julia was now suddenly a potential bride again. Having given birth to 2 sons, 2 daughters, and with a 5th child in the womb, Julia had proven her fertility, making her even more attractive to calculating suitors. Ironically, it was Caesar Augustus who had invited the fortune hunters by making marriage to his daughter, in and of itself, a type of high political office. How long before smiling men from ambitious families, oozing affection, came to pursue the hand of Caesar's daughter, desiring only to create offspring who were guaranteed by their lineage to be political gold mines. Perhaps, to head off such a scenario, Caesar might do with Julia as he had done with Egypt. Having learned from Sextus Pompeius just how easily Rome could be crippled by starvation, Augustus had made the decision that Egypt, treated as his own personal property, would be governed solely by equite men who lacked the minimum requirements for entry into Rome's Senate. Such men, without imperium, given authority only as administrators on behalf of Augustus, would simultaneously lack the necessary governmental authority to cut off Egypt's ongoing grain shipments to Rome, thus insulating the state from such a threat. We are told that Caesar Augustus actually considered an apathetic, low-level man by the name of Gaius Fonteius Capito as his next son-in-law. However, likely due to the fact that even those without ambition could easily become the political tools of others, he eventually rejected the idea of such a match. Better to marry Julia to someone whom Caesar Augustus could control. Unfortunately for Augustus, he already knew just such a man. Although, according to Augustus's new marriage and adultery laws, Julia was no longer obligated to marry anyone, having given birth to more than the required number of children to make her legally sui juris, or free from the ownership of men. But the father of the nation could hardly afford to leave one of the most politically valuable women in the Roman Empire unattached, dangling like bait before every patrician who hoped to latch on to her Julian lineage, gain proximity to her father, and be guaranteed substantial influence within the Roman state. This could not happen. Julia, the daughter of Augustus, must be carefully remarried. Caesar's stepson, Tiberius Claudius Nero, had spent the previous 5 years developing his military and diplomatic skills. By returning Rome's missing standards from Armenia, Tiberius had earned the love of the Roman people, and by successfully defeating the Vindelici tribes alongside his brother Drusus, he had gained much respect from Rome's legions, yet not so much as to put him in direct competition with Caesar Augustus, as had been the case with Marcus Agrippa. And it would be for the best if Julia's 2 daughters, both named Vipsania Julia, and the child she now carried in her womb, were to have a stepfather who had been raised with the highest of moral standards, those instilled by himself and his wife, Livia Drusilla. All Tiberius had to do was to divorce Vipsania. There was only one small problem. Tiberius had fallen in love with the daughter of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Although their marriage was initially a political arrangement agreed upon between Tiberius's mother, Livia, and Vipsania's father, Agrippa, the young couple found themselves happy together and quite compatible. Not only was there a deep bond between Tiberius and Vipsania, but when Vipsania then gave Tiberius a son, their affectionate familial circle expanded as Tiberius made the decision to name his firstborn son, not after himself, as was the custom with firstborn sons, but after his beloved brother Drusus. But the death of Marcus Agrippa had forced Caesar Augustus to close ranks, the personal feelings of those involved notwithstanding. He had no choice but to protect his daughter from ambitious men, and to take whatever steps were necessary to prevent an outsider from entering his family and upsetting the balance of power. And so Augustus ordered Tiberius to divorce his wife, Vipsania Agrippina, who was now pregnant with their second child. As Julia waited out the final months of her own pregnancy, preparing to give birth to her now deceased husband Agrippa's child, It is likely that legal arrangements were made to offset any claims of incest that might arise from her impending marriage to Tiberius, who was her stepbrother. Despite the fact that Tiberius and Julia were not related by blood, they were siblings by law, necessitating the formal adoption of Tiberius by a man named Marcus Gallius, who was likely a friend of Caesar Augustus. Sometime near the end of 12 BC, Julia gave birth to Marcus Agrippa's last child. Finally, though he had not lived long enough to know of him, Marcus Agrippa had a son who could carry on the Vipsanii name. Because he was born after his father's death, the baby was named Marcus Agrippa Postumus. After her mourning period had ended, Julia married her third husband. Tiberius, who lived next door to the villas of Augustus and his mother Livia, brought his new wife into his home and became stepfather to her children, but not with a happy heart. Tiberius had lost his precious Vipsania, coerced into forsaking her for another, the twice-widowed daughter of Caesar Augustus, a woman Tiberius deemed as having quite questionable morals.